Good morning, everyone, brothers, sisters, and friends. I don't know if I've been this excited for an exhortation. I'm very excited. I hope we cover as many things as I was hoping to, because it was originally supposed to be the latter half of this discussion on the dragon of Revelation, but this is part two of three. I'm going to have to do a third because there's just no way you can cover it all in one. But before we get into it, but basically what this one's going to focus on is the binding and the loosing of the dragon. But before we really get into it, I wanted to just do a quick recap of what we talked about last time because it's very important that we see the reason we're looking at this, how we are looking at it, is because of where this is how the scriptures guide us to. If we look at the other places and other indications of when the dragon of Revelation 20 is destroyed, this is what we see. So last time we talked about some established things I think we all agree on that Christ's rule has got two basic phases. You got the Davidic conquering phase, where he establishes borders, and then he establishes peace, and then the Solomonic phase, where that peace is just maintained throughout the entire reign. So we looked at Joshua 11 and how Joshua follows the same pattern. And Joshua 11 has this account of Jabin and his host coming against Joshua. They surround him and then they're destroyed, basically. And how this very clearly and can only refer to the end of this is the beginning of Christ's reign, but specifically the point where the Davidic phase ends. And as a result of this conflict, you have the Solomonic phase of peace and all that. So we looked at, you can break Joshua up into these two sections where the first 11 chapters of the Davidic phase, which ends with him taking the whole land, giving it to an inheritance unto Israel, and dividing it to their tribes. The land rested from war, and that marks the end of the Davidic phase and the beginning of the Solomonic phase, where, hey, here's everybody we conquered. Here's the rest that we got to conquer because we know this is a shadow. It's not going to fulfill it perfectly. But here's a land that people inherited and so on. We have a long time passing. But seeing that, we looked at how Joshua 11 is the basis for Revelation 20. I mean, all the terminology, the descriptors, all these things, Revelation 20 is borrowing from Joshua 11. And that's a very important thing because if Joshua 11 is the basis for Revelation 20, specifically verses 7 through 10, where the dragon's destroyed, and Joshua 11 represents something toward the beginning of Christ's reign, then Revelation 20 must as well, if they're referring to the same kind of thing. So we looked at Joshua's rule, where this is where we have Jabin's defeat. And if it was supposed to show something that happens at the end of Christ's rule, after this long period of peace, the perfect place to mention this attack by Jabin would be in chapter 23:1, but it's not there. Anyways, um, but then so we saw that that was a indicator of the dragon being destroyed towards the beginning of Christ's reign. There were two other passages we looked at. Isaiah 27:1 is one of them where it talks about the Lord's going to punish Leviathan, the piercing serpent, that crooked serpent, and he's going to slay the dragon that's in the sea. And the whole context for this is the resurrection. And this is when the Lord arises to punish the iniquity of the earth, things that we very clearly understand to be the beginning of Christ's reign. Then we also looked at Psalm 74, verses 13 and 14, which talks about him breaking the heads of the dragons in the waters and breaking the heads of Leviathan in pieces and so on. And how the meat of the dragon and Leviathan is meat for these people in the wilderness. And Brother Thomas believed that the people in the wilderness are the saints in Israel after the flesh, made willingly subject to them. So that is obviously referring to the kingdom age because you have mortal Israel. Now he led this to a different conclusion, but we briefly talked about why that doesn't really follow. But anyway, so there's three witnesses of this, basically that this general sequence, and then how we saw at the very end of Joshua, how we have this correlation to 1 Corinthians 15 when Christ has put all enemies down, death is swallowed up in victory, and God himself comes down, and there's a shadow of that in 1 Corinthians 15. So if we look at Joshua's rule and where Jabin's defeat is, and we compare that to Christ's rule, and we put that same thing in the same spot, this is kind of what we see. The dragon's destroyed at the end of the Davidic phase of Christ's reign. So, what we're going to talk about now And I'd really highly recommend downloading these slides because there's a lot of charts and visuals, especially if you can't see them, but to refer back to later because, everybody needs to look into these things for themselves. But we're going to focus on when was the dragon or Satan bound for 1,000 years, verses 1 through 3. When was it loosed? And then give a timeline basically of the dragon in Revelation. And there's this things I'm planning to put into part 3. This is just some of them because there's a lot of other questions about this of who is the angel of Revelation 20 verse 1. We'll actually talk about that today, but more specifically showing it next time. Biggest question is if this is not talking about basically if the 1,000 year periods of Revelation 20 are not the same as the rule of Christ in every case, why do we have something that jumps back in time in Revelation 20? Why is this recorded here? Um, as we'll see, the dragon's cast in the lake of fire where the beast and the false prophet are, which means that they're destroyed first. So we'll talk about that. And then look at there's actually another witness of kind of like Joshua 11 that shows the same sort of sequence. So, anyways, it is very, very important to look at what context do we have Revelation 20 in? So it is very important that we have a general understanding of Revelation 19. It would be great to read it all. We just don't have time. But there's a reason Revelation 20 comes after that. And it's the continuity, the apparent continuity in the narrative that makes us wonder like, well, if this is a different time period, why does it not sound like that? But when we look at it, there's some very clear indications. But basically, Revelation 20 shows that the whore that's been riding upon this beast has been destroyed. We have the record of the marriage supper of the Lamb. Now, very importantly, in verses 11 through 16, we have this man on a white horse with eyes of fire, a sword in his mouth, raiment dipped in blood, and he's got an army of saints following him on horses. And this is Jesus smiting the nations and ruling them with a rod of iron. That's a very important part that he rules them with a rod of iron, and that this is referring to Jesus himself. And after that, we have this angel who stands in the sun, and he calls to the fowls of the world to come and enjoy the supper of God and eat in the flesh of all the enemies that they were just destroyed. And very importantly, actually, go ahead turn this up. Let's just read this short passage because this is the main chunk that we want to take away from this fact. So it's Revelation 19 verses 19 through 21. And it says, "And I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and the armies gathered together to make war against him that sat on the horse and against his army. And the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that wrought miracles before him, with which he deceived them that had received the mark of the beast, and them that worshipped his image. These both were cast alive into a lake of fire, burning with brimstone. And the remnant were slain with the sword of him that sat upon the horse, which proceeded out of his mouth, and all the fowls were filled with their flesh." So, beast and false prophet are cast in the lake of fire. We're not going to talk about what those are for time. Now, it's very important that there's no dragon here. Dragon is nowhere to be found in Revelation 19. You read a lot of commentaries that say, oh, yeah, they're there, they're working, they're just not mentioned. It's like, no, they're not mentioned for a reason. So, what we find is Revelation 19 describes the end, the final fate of the beast and the false prophet. And what Revelation 20 does is it describes the end of the dragon. And as we'll see, this describes this to us in two different ways. And it's very, very beautiful. The more I learned about this, the more I don't know, just kept saying wow. But so with that, um, turn over to Revelation 20. We're not going to read the whole thing because we are going to kind of work through a couple verses. But the main things we're going to read right now, we're going to read verses 1 through 3 and then 7 through 10. And I'll just quickly summarize what happens between. So, following that context, it says, "And I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years. And cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled. And after that he must be loosed a little season." And then verses 4 through 6, we have this vision of I saw thrones. Um, this is a vision of the saints ruling. Now, it's important that it doesn't mention them conquering here. These they sit on their thrones, they live and reign with Christ 1,000 years. You have this blessing of people who are part of the first resurrection that reign with him 1,000 years. And as verse 7 picks up, and when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison and shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. And they went up on the breadth of the earth and compassed the camp of the saints about in the beloved city, and fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. And the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and shall be tormented day and night forever and ever. So, there's a lot of things we could take out of this, but there are some of these things are open to interpretation, but there are some absolutes. Um, so basically, like I said earlier, first, there is a reason why this occurs we're revealed this information in Revelation 20, and it follows the destruction of the beast and the false prophet. There's a reason for that. Also, there's a period of 1,000 years mentioned 6 times, and sometimes it's referred to 1,000, sometimes as the 1,000, and I think that's somewhat significant. But even if, so these are potentially different periods, but if they are different periods, they are the same length. So there is a reason why they are the same length. Now, the 1,000 year period of verse 7 is without question the end of that period, which starts in verses 1 through 3. So basically, you have a 1,000 year binding, and in verse 7, it's the end of that 1,000 year period. Very importantly, verses 4 through 6 actually it's to the actual rule of the saints, because it mentions that these ones ruling are the ones who were killed, resurrected, and now sit on the thrones and rule with Christ. Because as we'll see, there's a place in Revelation where it sounds like the saints are ruling, but it's actually talking about something in history. But this is definitely the kingdom age itself. And absolutely essential, the dragon is loosed after the 1,000 years expires. It's not toward the end of this, and this is very important because this is what a lot of people assume. And this is assuming that the 1,000 year binding is the same as the 1,000 year reign of Christ. This is what we assume is, well, the dragon's bound, 1,000 years begins, you've got this binding period, and then toward the end of Christ's rule, the dragon's loosed, it goes out to deceive, and then it's destroyed. Boom, 1,000 years expires, and God's all in all. But what it says is, it's after that he must be loosed. It's when the 1,000 years is expired, Satan's loosed. So this is what we see. I mean, the binding period is 1,000 years, and it's only after that that it's loosed. Not that it's destroyed. Because consider, this has to deceive the nations in the four quarters of the earth. Like, this is the planet we're talking about here. So that's going to take time. So we have to basically come to a conclusion. Does Christ rule for 1,000 years? Because if he does, what happens after that 1,000 years expires? Is that his reign ends and then the dragon's loosed? And Christ steps off the throne, the dragon's loosed, and everything turns to sin? Or is it that his reign ends and God's all in all? So any interpretation that shows the dragon being destroyed before this, or being loosed, I should say, before Christ's rule ends, it doesn't fit with any other scripture, and definitely does not is not what this is teaching here. So we need to think of that when we're considering our viewpoints. So let's kind of start working through this. And really, it would not take me much time to just tell you, here's what I think this means. But it's better to show, and I think I'd like to show how I came to these conclusions. And I have a ton of historical sources. I want history to explain this. I've got tons more than I'll show here. I've had a 2 foot tall stack of books on my desk for the last 2 years, and that's what this is all for. So if you'd like other sources, let me know. But to kind of break this down, because it's important that we get the meat out of this. So as I mentioned, Revelation 19:7 talks about this angel standing in the sun, calling to all the fowls of the air. The angel of Revelation 20 is a different angel, and a lot of people say they're exactly the same angel, but it talks about the angel in the sun. And Revelation 20 starts with not And I saw the angel come down from heaven. So I saw an angel, and it's a small detail, but it's a very important one. And if you look in Revelation 10, Revelation is very clear usually of which angel is being talked about. In Revelation 10, there's an angel that's 1 foot on the sand, 1 foot on the sea, and it attaches that title to that angel at least 2 or 3 times. So you have no question of what angel is being talked about. So that one we'll talk about more in part 3. Also important, where is the dragon at this time? Well, it doesn't exactly say, but we know that dragon is not in heaven because the angel has to come down from heaven to bind him. So that's also important. If we're trying to picture this in our minds, this angel also has the key to the bottomless pit. And so when we think of what the key represents in Scripture, if we compare this to Revelation 1:18, that Christ is the one who has the key to hell and death and all this, it means he has the authority and the right to do this, whereas others don't. And as we'll see, hopefully I get time to talk about today, there's a reason that this specific individual that we're going to see has the key to do this. In the bottomless pit, this is probably better rendered the abyss. And in Revelation, this is some people will actually put this on a map, like, hey, this the bottomless pit's over here. No, this is a symbolic holding place for something that to where it has no effect on the nations at large. And there's a couple other places that it's talked about in Revelation. Some people say it's a different word in each place, but from what I can see, it's the same exact sort of abyss in each spot. But either way, that's what we get from verse 1. And very importantly, whatever the chain is, that is the method of the binding and the suppression of this dragon. And whatever this chain is, whatever binds it, it has to exist for the whole 1,000-year period. So let's go on to verse 2 and 3. As we saw, the binding period is 1,000 years. It's only loosed after that period. And this is very, very important. It says that he must be loosed a little season. I've read so many books on this, and not a single book that I've read or view by the traditional view is explained why he must be loosed. Because there's two basic answers I've read and seen is, well, first, sin, if they're interpreting the dragon as sin in the flesh or sin in whatever form, it has to bear its head. It just must. So that's not really an answer because you're saying it must because it has to. The other answer gets a little bit deeper is that basically interpreting the dragon as sin in any political form or sin in the flesh that, because of the reign of Christ is going to be so absolute that there's going to be no opportunity for people to exert their own free will and prove their obedience. And so therefore it's necessary in order to determine people's obedience for Christ and the saints to pull back their whole reign and let people make their own decision. Lots of problems with that, apart from the fact that there's zero scripture that shows it and a bunch that shows otherwise. But this is saying that, is there really no way to tell who's genuine and not genuine during Christ's reign? I mean, you've got Christ and the immortal saints ruling. God's been able to tell who's serving lip service and genuine before. Why is that not possible during the kingdom age? So why must the dragon be loose? We need to have a clear reason. And I think we'll see that. So what I want to do now is we're in Revelation 20. Where do we go from here? How do we understand this? Well, if you look at this is a chart that shows every mention, every title given to the dragon in the book of Revelation. You can see it's talked about a lot in Revelation 12, a little bit in 13. But then we have this gap, and then we see it in Revelation 16 and then 20 and so on. Now, when we're looking at this and we're like, okay, I want to learn more about this, is there anything that sticks out? Because to me, we're in Revelation 20. We find that we have this very long specific title, which, again, you think of it, I mean, it's talked about back in Revelation 12. You have the dragon, that old serpent called the devil and Satan. And after that, it's just called the devil, the dragon, the serpent. Like, it's very short because we already know what this thing is. But here, towards the end, there's a necessity to rehash this whole long title. We already know very clearly what entity is talked about. Why is this long, specific title used again? And what I think it's saying is, hey, this is referring to something back in this time period. There is a connection here. Whether we like it or not, there's a reason these are the same. And we talked about this in class last week or whenever we had it last. But this is the same phrase, but in the traditional view, they're interpreted to be two different things. And if you just look at it in the Green Book, in Revelation 12, the dragon is identified with pagan Rome before it became Christianized. But in Revelation 20, it's supposedly used throughout the apocalypse as a symbol for sin manifested politically. So one's very specific, one's very general. And we see the same concept applied to this, where in Revelation 12, very clearly they say, well, it's pagan Rome, is what the Green Book says. But then in Revelation 20, it's sin politically, like in any form at all. And there's never been, apart from the government of Israel, you could say, a institution of a political institution that has not been run by sin. Even if it's Christian, it's still run by sin. So why are these different? And nobody I've seen explained why it's the same title, but we can interpret it differently. And it's also important to note that the beast and all these other things, we don't change how we interpret those throughout the book. That's always the same. So we're getting special treatment given to the dragon here. Now, what's interesting is when we go back to Revelation 12:9, this is the point when the dragon is cast out of heaven. So I'm not going to read this. I really recommend reading it on your own because we'll just have to summarize for time's sake. But if we go back to Revelation 12, basically we have this account of, and actually, I guess it probably would be good to turn it up. But we have this account of this woman in heaven with the sun at her feet and standing in the sun. She gives birth to this man child, and then the great red dragon tries to consume this child as soon as he's born. And then the child's caught up to heaven. This child is one who's to rule the nations with a rod of iron. And then the later we see that this child is grown. He's called Michael, and he fights the dragon in heaven, casts him out, and so on. So what this is talking about is it's very interesting that these titles sound like Christ. When we just read it, it sounds like Christ. You know, and this is talking about Constantine actually, and there's a very important reason for all this. But in Revelation 12:4, his life was sought at birth. That this is, as soon as Constantine came into the Roman political heavens, like he had it out for him. In Revelation or Matthew 12 or 2 talks about Christ. Obviously, Herod sought him at his birth. Ruling with a rod of iron, as we saw in Revelation 19, that is a title of Christ, that he's going to do that. And this individual is supposed to do the same kind of thing. Caught up to God, obviously, that sounds very similar to Christ. Obviously, Christ didn't ascend to God as a child. He was a grown man. And then Michael, we have this individual called Michael, which means who is as El, who is as God. And Christ, obviously, is something that fits that. So essentially, the question is, I guess first, it's very important to say that this is not talking about Jesus himself, because as it says at the very beginning of Revelation, John was to be shown things which must shortly come to pass. He's disclosing things which really have not been disclosed very much before. Christ was already born and ascended 40, 50 years before this. So this is not a prophecy of Christ's birth. We already know that. This is something future that sounds like that. So the question is, what is this? And as we'll see, Christadelphians understand this very well, that what Constantine did and was is a symbol. It's a historical symbol or shadow of what Christ is going to do at his coming. So what is the dragon? Well, I don't think we can call it pagan Rome, because that makes it sound like Rome itself is the dragon. Like that was the seat of the dragon. Now we know this because this dragon, as it says in Revelation 12, has 7 heads. These are the 7 hills of Rome. So this is describing the nature of Rome. And we'll talk more about what this nature of Roman paganism was. But it's not Rome the city, because Rome is represented in Revelation 13 under its Christian form as the beast of the sea. So Rome has a different title, but it's called the beast of the sea at that point because it's not pagan anymore, it's Christian. So we have a different symbol for it, but we know this is still talking about Rome because just like the dragon that has the 7 heads or 7 hills, the beast also has 7 heads. So it's showing how Rome has changed. So the dragon is not Rome. It is this Roman paganism, this belief system that ruled Rome at the time. And so if we're thinking of what is Rome, Rome were the heavens that were fought over, essentially. Now, what is this? What is the dragon really? Like, how do we understand it? Well, it's very clear that it was very liberal and it was tolerant of basically every religion except for the truth. The purpose of the official cults in the pagan state was to secure the protection of the deities. These were liberal and tolerant lords who raised no objection to other forms of worship, and toleration was therefore a principle of the state. As also says in this other book, there's never been a more tolerant age than Rome because Rome placed no barriers to any religion, essentially. So remember that because we're going to come back to that. This is a belief system that accepts everything except for God, basically. And we move forward and we look at there's war in heaven, as it says in Revelation 12. Um, this is a very clear historical period where Constantine, who assumed the symbol of Christ, is fighting against these other people combating for the throne who are all pagan. So Constantine claimed to have a vision. He saw this sign come from heaven and a voice that said, "In this sign, conquer." And so this is not a cross. I think this is kind of where we get the cross. So it's a chiro. If Greek word for Christ is Christos. Chi is the first letter, rho is the second. So if you mix those two together, you get this symbol here. So Constantine's got this vision. Hey, if you conquer, if you fight in this symbol, in the name of the cross, basically, you will conquer. And so that night, or the next day, he had his soldiers paint this on their shields, and they fought and they killed the other competing army, which was Maxentius at the time. Now, what's interesting is pagan Rome was very clearly the red dragon. Like, these are the military banners that they would carry before their, like, it's a red dragon. So, we're thinking of Constantine versus Maxentius at this battle. You've got these Roman soldiers on the right who are Constantines with this symbol of cross, and then we've got the dragon they're fighting. I mean, this is the war in heaven, basically. Um, Now, there's a couple of different things Constantine had to do to actually declare victory, but a man, Eusebius, was a bishop of the church at the time, a historian very close to Constantine, and he very well shows that this is, I mean, there's all kinds of historical sources that show this, that Revelation 12 is talking about Constantine. And he wrote a biography of Constantine's life and history of the church. And the last enemy, pagan enemy that Constantine destroyed was a man named Licinius. And it says that now with liberty restored and that dragon driven out from the public administration through the providence of the supreme God and by our service. So the dragon is cast out of the public administration by Constantine. This is exactly what history says. And he continues on. This is what Constantine had made in his around his throne. He caused to be painted a lofty tablet, uh, so to be visible to all, a representation of the salutary sign placed above his head, so with the Chiro, and below that, a hateful and savage adversary of mankind. And he talks about this entity falling under the form of a dragon to the abyss of destruction. For the sacred oracles and the books of God's prophets have described him as a dragon and a crooked serpent, and for this reason the emperor thus publicly displayed a painted resemblance of the dragon beneath his and his children's feet, struck him through with a dart. So they really thought, hey, we're doing this. Like, this is exactly what God tells us to do. And the prophets, he cites Isaiah and Psalm, like we just saw that the dragons destroyed. Excuse me. So, and we know this, and we look at their coins, and we see very clear evidence of this, that this is Constantine's coin, or one of them, and we have this military banner, and we'll discuss what this is more later, but sign of Christ at the top, and it's just subdued a serpent, the dragon. So we see this as like, wow, this is clear that what Constantine did is in Revelation, and he is a symbol of what Christ is going to do. And that is a very well understood concept by Christadelphians, and that, Constantine is a symbol of what Christ is going to do on a greater scale in the future. As this book, this is a Christadelphian work, The Dragon and the Lamb says, Constantine's work is typical of Christ, who will elevate the truth forever and sweep away all forms of paganism. So what he did on that Roman scale, Christ is going to do on the whole world scale. So Constantine and his followers, they ousted paganism, idolatry from the Roman heavens, and his successors destroyed it throughout the empire. And as it says here, it established a millennium of Catholic ascendancy, or a church age. And the symbol of this is that Christ and the saints are going to oust paganism from the entire political heavens and destroy it forever, thus establishing the 1,000-year kingdom age. So, very beautiful. And we see this, like, if you continue in Revelation 12, this is what I mean. It sounds like the kingdom age. Like the dragon's cast out, and I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, "Now has come salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night." It's like almost exactly what Eusebius just said. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. It's another thing Eusebius said, that God gave us this victory, and they loved not their lives to death. Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell on them. Now this is an important part. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil has come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time. So this sounds, if you pull it out of context, like the kingdom age, but this is literally what people thought at the time, that the kingdom is here. Like this is the kingdom age, basically. But that's showing it's a symbol of the kingdom age, but it's a actual historical fact. And there's a bunch of other things. This is from another work of Eusebius, just showing that this is how they thought of the age. The trophies of victory over the wicked. All things are filled with light now. All who were before sunk in sorrow beheld each other with smiling and cheerful faces, with choirs and hymns and so on, praising God and their emperor. There was a perfect oblivion of past evils, and past wickedness was buried in forgetfulness. And there's so many sources on this that show that they really thought this, and this lines up exactly with Revelation 12. Now, we go back to Revelation 20 and Revelation 12. If we picture this in our minds, we have the same exact scene because we have the same title in both places. In Revelation 12 and 20, this dragon is talked about as the deceiver of the whole world. And it's the same place that this dragon's now cast to the earth. And in Revelation 20, he's not in heaven anymore. He's on the earth. So if we're just picturing this in our minds, we have the same sort of visual, which is important. But here's the problem. As the traditional view goes, Constantine's work is typical of Christ, who will sweep away all forms of paganism. So what they're saying is ousting the dragon from the political heavens equates to it being cast in the lake of fire and symbol. The problem is that doesn't really seem to fit. Like, just not even removing it completely, but removing it from the ruling powers equals complete destruction. It doesn't really fit, especially because the dragon continued. As it says by the people in heaven, he has a short time. He's down to the earth, and he's persecuting the woman. So the question is, what happens after this short time? Doesn't really say. It's a cliffhanger when we're reading this. Whatever it is, it's going to prevent the dragon from persecuting the woman, because he persecutes the woman because he has a short time. And that's all we're told. So, how does the traditional view explain what is this short time? Well, the Green Book, again, it says that by this time paganism was a doomed cause. The success of Constantine against Maxentius in 312 made this obvious. And it was only 12 years later, so 324 AD, when the first so-called Christian emperor was acknowledged as the sole monarch of the Roman Empire, and paganism had received its final defeat within its border. So what he's saying is paganism received its final defeat in 324 AD. Problem is that's a historical falsehood. Like, factually, that's just not correct. So we have this theory based off something which is factually incorrect. Constantine did not inflict the final defeat on paganism, and it lived on for 200 more years, as tons of sources show. And in fact, he made no attempt to force the pace of Christianity. As this says, his policy did little more than indicate and prepare the way for the gradual conversion of the empire. And he was so mild and cautious that it had been maintained by some that his aim was to establish a parity between the two religions, paganism and Christianity. And as Story of Christian Church says, he was tolerant. He favored toleration of everything. So Constantine did not. It was not the end of paganism, but it signaled it. So what I thought is, like, well, when did it end? Like, if we follow this in the history, what do we see? When was its actual final defeat? And before we talk about that, I want you to observe something real quick here. So we have the dragon. The last two times we see it, it's in Revelation 13, um, and then Revelation 13:11. It talks about the beast who spake as a dragon. So it's not talking about the dragon, but it's the beast. But for transparency, it was a mention, so I wanted to have it here. But the last two times we see the dragon actually acting and doing something, it's in Revelation 13, and then it's gone to Revelation 16. So if we put this on a timeline, we have Revelation 12, 312 to 324 AD. He's cast out of heaven. He's got a short time. Revelation 13 mentions that he gave his power to the beast, which I think is just a very simple way of saying this is the beast is the entity, basically the rule of that took the place of paganism, essentially. And then we have Revelation 16, which is this Ottoman Euphratean power dries up that the kings of the east may be prepared to deceive the nations to fight against Christ. So this is very important because this is the next time we see this dragon. It's unclean frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. These are the spirits of devils working miracles which go forth to the kings of the earth and of the whole world to gather them to the battle of the great day of God Almighty. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? He comes as a thief. We have this intervention of Christ returning here, and he gathered them together into a place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon. So, what is this talking about? Well, Revelation 16 is the Euphratean power drying up that the kings of the east be prepared. This is World War One. Like the Ottoman power, which is the where the river Euphrates literally starts, it had all this land in World War One, and then afterwards they were defeated. The Ottoman power dried up, and all these Eastern powers came up in their place. Now, I mention this because it's only after this happens that the frog spirits go forth from the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. It's only after that. So these three entities, these frog spirits, are working after World War One. So when we put this on the map again, we have the dragon doing these things from 312, 324, and then we have no record of him till after World War One. This is about 1,600 years of absence in the narrative of Revelation. What's the dragon doing? Where is the dragon? Well, to kind of get to the nitty gritty here, just as we saw how David and Solomon represent phases of Christ's rule, as we're going to see more, Constantine and his successors in his same throne represent phases of Christ's rule. And this is amazing. There's three prominent ones that you look at. So we're looking at Constantine, Theodosius, and Justinian. All these people gave themselves the titles the Great, by the way. But as a shadow, again, a shadow doesn't do everything perfectly. It's a form of it. And the reason you have multiple people in a shadow is because not one of them encompasses everything. Like David couldn't rule and build the temple, but Christ is going to build the temple. So you have to have David and Solomon. So what Constantine did, as we saw, he did dethrone paganism from the Roman heavens, and he opened the way for acceptance of Christianity, but he didn't prevent it from being practiced, taught, believed, any of these things. It still resided on the earth, as it says, and it still persecuted the church or the woman. So as a shadow goes, this is the initial stage of Christ's rule. It's dethroning paganism from the political heavens of the entire planet. And then we go to Theodosius, a number of years later. He's noted for making Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. Like it wasn't official until Theodosius. And he passed tons of laws outlawing pagan beliefs and practices and different things. As it says here, it remained for Theodosius to inflict a far heavier blow on the ancient cults of Greece and Rome. Again, showing that Constantine didn't do it all. He was trying to make a clean sweep of it from 391, 392. It was clear that this was a epoch in the decay of paganism, but still there. So it still has a time. And as it says, though, his problem is he didn't enforce any of these laws that he passed. So he passed all this legislation, but he didn't do anything because he didn't enforce it. So he didn't close the institutions. And if you think of if something is going to deceive, there are certain things that have to be in place. Like it has to be able to act, it has to be able to teach. And he didn't prevent any of those things. So we still see a stepping stone in the reign of Christ, so that this is the second stage where the truth, to think of this as a historical symbol, is the truth of the one faith of the whole world. And you think of how the world's going to be conquered. It's not every individual first. It's all the governments and control works down. So this is the second stage of that, where the whole world's in his hand. He's just got to work it down. Now, Justinian, this is amazing. Uh, he I mean, he came into power with his uncle. He was like 40 something, and he was like, hey, I didn't get to rule as early as other people. I got a lot I want to do. And he passed more legislation, I think, than any other emperor in his Roman history, but he enforced it. So he passed new legislation, which he enforced, and he also enforced all the old legislation that everybody else had passed. So he closed the schools. He made it illegal to do all these different things, and he also forced unbelievers to come to the churches to learn the Christian faith. And if you think of this as a symbol of Christ, what are the nations going to have to do? They're going to have to come up to worship and learn. And so it was actually Justinian who actually destroyed it from the empire. And I mean, this is a book this is a heading in the book. The Acts of Justinian, the suppression of paganism. Doesn't that sound like binding? And it says throughout the 5th century, the severe laws against paganism were not very strictly enforced. This comparatively tolerant attitude of the state terminated with the accession of Justinian, who had firmly resolved to realize the conception of an empire in which there should be no differences of religious opinion. Paganism was dying slowly. It didn't seem a difficult task to extinguish it entirely. And he saw that Hellenism, which is that's the main what they were talking about at the time of different beliefs, it was kept alive by pagan instructors of youth, especially in teaching establishments. So he knew if I'm going to eradicate this thing for good, I got to target those so it can't deceive. Um, I mean, and there's tons of sources that the old faiths were virtually extinct throughout the empire when he enforced all these things. And the crowning act of all of this is him closing the schools, because that's where it lived on. And they were closed by Justinian in 529. So, um, why did he close it? Well, I mean, Justinian, I don't think he knows what he's doing here as far as the symbol goes, but he closed it because, this law soon followed by another, which made it illegal for any persons infected with the madness of the unholy Hellenes or this paganism to teach any subject, and thereby, under the pretext of education, corrupt their souls of their pupils. So Justinian's reasoning was, if we let these pagan teachers continue under the education pretext, they're going to corrupt the souls of people. This is deceiving people. As long as they can teach, it's going to deceive. I'm not keeping with my notes here at all, but um, now we mentioned Eusebius describes this big thing that Constantine made of around his throne, this big artwork of him defeating the dragon. Look at this thing. I forgot to mention this. Justinian, made it illegal not only to perform pagan rituals or rites, but to even be a pagan. So if you think of the control going down to the individual level, he enforced it. Like he was boots on the ground, basically. And this is where it mentions that this is a decree from Justinian. Those who have not yet been deemed worthy of worshipful baptism must make themselves known and go with their wives and children and their whole household to the most holy churches to be taught the true Christian faith. Anybody who didn't do that, they were exiled or they were killed. That's it. And as it says, this is the most extreme anti-pagan legislation anybody had ever passed. So what he did, he finished it as far as the shadow goes. All enemies are subdued, the dragon included. And this is what I was trying to say. We have this big thing that Constantine made to show what he did of destroying the dragon, and so he thought this is what Justinian had made. This is called the Hagia Sophia. What is this? Well, he had this made because this is in symbol him destroying all of his enemies. The eagle strangling a snake becomes a symbol of the supreme power of Justinian. The snake is the symbol of all enemies of the empire. And as you can see, the eagle's killing the serpent here and all that. So, I mean, this is just history. You can go look at this in the Hagia Sophia today. I would love to see it. He's killing a serpent. So, Justinian, let's say he's the one that binds this, but what are the chains? So there's legislation, but big part of this legislation was with the church. I mean, he's very noted for joining church and state power together. Agents of the church were integral in figuring out who the pagans were and suppressing it. As it says in the story of the Christian church, as a result of church and state becoming one, the result was not Christianity, but a more or less corrupt hierarchy controlling the nations of Europe, making the church mainly a political machine. So because of what he did, the church basically controlled Europe. It wasn't just him, but there were others. But the church definitely was the main form of keeping this down, with making Christianity the only belief. Principle of toleration was ended since the institution of state church meant the banning of all other religions. Excuse me. And as we go into the medieval church age, which is 1,000 years, it did not tolerate anything. Anybody who, I mean, people talk about the church age, the Catholic Church, as well, this is a horrible period, but in symbol, like this is a symbol of Christ ruling everything. So, how did they actually do this? There's a number of ways that the church actually suppressed all these other belief systems. First, there were heresy laws, so basically it was illegal. But you have an inquisition where this is an organization of people that are literally, their only job is to figure out who believes differently so they can uh, prosecute them. And then they controlled all the information. You got the Crusades and all these other things. But if we're looking at in history, was there a period when the dragon, which we all acknowledge and believe, was paganism in Rome? And I mean, because everybody agrees that's it in Revelation 12. If we're looking for a period when that was bound, it's 529. So we look at this as history, and so at the top we got history, and the bottom we got the shadow of Christ that history represents. So Constantine dethrones paganism. This is Christ dethroning paganism from the political heavens of the earth. Constantine only did it in the heavens of Rome. In Theodosius, we see the progress of Christ's kingdom, where he declares Christianity the one official empire religion, and then Christ declares the truth, the official religion of the earth. And Justinian in 529 caps it off, where he closes all the schools, exterminates it, and just as Christ would. Basically, this is the earth is filled with the knowledge of the Lord, as the sea is filled with water, basically. So, whole earth's filled with the knowledge of the Lord. That's what Justinian and type did. Uh, Now, what's really, really cool is that we looked at Constantine's coin. And we're like, yeah, that's clear proof that he's a symbol of Christ. So I thought, well, what do the coins of these guys look like? So in this coin, what you see is this vertical thing that's called a labarum. That's the military standard that they would carry in front of their armies. There's a cross, the sign of Christ on top of it. The three dots on that banner, those were medallions of Constantine and his sons, and then it's subduing a serpent. So we have the symbol of Christ and his sons in the name of the truth subduing the serpent, casting it from the political heavens. So if you think of what does progress from that point look forward, you look at Theodosius's coin. This is the Emperor Theodosius standing. So he's got his military attire on. He's standing. So this is a military phase still. He's also got a labarum with a cross on it. And in his other hand, that's a globe. So if you think of this symbolically of what Jesus is doing, he's conquered the earth. It's in his hand, but he's not done yet. Now, if you were to take that and say, okay, what would we change about this imagery to indicate all enemies are subdued? You know, that it's the Solomonic phase. There's no more war. What would we change from this one? This is Justinian's coin. That's him sitting in a throne, so he's not standing anymore. He's done acting. He's also traded in his military attire for a robe because he's not fighting anymore. He's got a crown on his head. He's sitting in a throne, so he's ruling. He doesn't have a labarum anymore. He's not fighting. That is a scepter. And the coolest part of all of it is look at where the cross is now. It's on top of the globe. The whole earth is filled with the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. And I actually have this first coin. I looked it up yesterday. You can't find it for sale. It's between $8,000 and $13,000. But I do have these last two up here. So if you guys would like to see them afterwards, I'll show you. Um, it's beautiful. Is it not beautiful? And I thought, well, it doesn't necessarily have to line up. And especially if this has no weight in it at all, I'd expect these to be completely different. But how perfectly it fits. So moving forward, Justinian bound the dragon through the church in 529. We're doing the math, 1529, if this is actually correct. So, is there anything in this period? And again, the chain has to be the same. You know, it can't change identity. So, is there anything in this period that would constitute the loosing of this church restraint and suppression? Well, it brings us right to the time of the Protestant Reformation, doesn't it? You know, Martin Luther, you know, the church controlled everything, but the thing that marked its end was the his 95 Theses. He nailed them to the door of the church, and this was in 1517. So this was not just, hey, we don't believe like you. This is striking at the authority of the Pope and the priesthood. So this is a full out rebellion against the church. So if we do the math, does this fit? It's 988 years from 529 to 517. It's a 98.8% match. Which you're like, man, that's pretty good. That's a really good grade. Um, but the question is, when he nailed that to the door, I mean, was the church power broken as soon as that nail went in? No. I mean, those concepts have to spread in order to create a group of people who can actually oppose the church power. So how long do you think it took for his ideas to spread enough to where the church power is actually really challenged? Well, there was this thing called uh, the Second Diet of Spire. It was, I'll just read this. The Second Diet of Spire, held in 1529, was a significant event in the history of the Protestant Reformation. The Reformation, initiated by Martin Luther in 1517 with his 95 Theses, had rapidly spread across Europe, challenging the doctrines and authority of the Roman Catholic Church. The Diet of Spire was convened by the Holy Roman Emperors, so on, to address this division that was growing. So, 1,000 years later, we have this movement that has challenged it. As it says here, finally, Luther's objections, which launched the Protestant Reformation, broke the power of the medieval church. And there's all other kinds of things like uh, what were the effects of this? It was a pivotal moment in the Reformation. It marked a clear and organized opposition to the Catholic Church's authority. Just for time's sake, it says, the Second Diet of Spire was uh, and the resulting protests were instrumental in establishing religious freedom, and it laid the groundwork for modern religious pluralism. So I'm like, what on earth is that? Religious pluralism. Well, remember the definition of what was Roman paganism like. Uh, this is just from Bible Hub describing what is religious pluralism. All religions are equally valid paths to divine ultimate reality. And it goes on. It says, you can believe whatever you want. And it gives us an example. It says, for example, in ancient Rome, they did this. The dragons resurface. The old ways of thinking are back. And there's another thing of it, basically. So we look at this. Where's the dragon? Why is the dragon inactive? Well, I mean, this is when the dragon was bound. And what's very interesting is if you look at Revelation 27, it says he's loosed so he can go to deceive the nations and fight against Christ. In Revelation 16, we see 400 years later, it's doing the same thing, but it's not just the dragon anymore. It's the same. If we look at Revelation 27 and 8 and Revelation 16, it's the same scene. So we have the dragon on earth as a timeline. He's bound from 529 to 1529. The dragon deceives from then onward, but after World War I, we have the false prophet and the beast who's deceiving him as well. So this is just a little bit more depth on that. But looking at the scene of Revelation 20, dragon's on the earth. He's deceiving nations to fight Christ. He's doing this to the four quarters of the earth, and the result is that the nations fight Christ. And in Revelation 16, it's the same thing. The dragon's not in heaven, it's on the earth, it seems. He's deceiving the nations to the whole world, which correlates to the four quarters of the earth. And the result is that they fight against Christ. This is the same picture, this is the same time period. It's pre-kingdom, or at least pre-Solomonic phase. Now, the big question is, why would God have Justinian bind a dragon for 1,000 years? Like, if this is historical, what's the symbol of binding it for 1,000 years? Well, if you look up if you just basically just do some studying, in Revelation 4:9, we're told that there's man sits on the throne who's Christ, who lives forever and ever. And in Revelation 11:15, we're told that this man reigns forever and ever. So it's the same exact Greek phrase, forever and ever. Now, the thing is, we know that Jesus will actually live for eternity. Like, it's not a limited period, it's forever. But is Christ going to reign for eternity? No. We know he's going to step down after 1,000 years, God's going to rule. So forever and ever, same exact Greek phrase, by the way. It means eternity in some places, and it means 1,000 years in other places. So what we could see is 1,000 years can symbolize forever and ever. So when we look at this figure, Justinian binds the dragon for a period which represents eternity, and the symbol is it being bound for 1,000 years. But Christ actually destroys the dragon by casting it into the lake of fire for eternity. So it's the same exact event. One is just the historical shadow of it, and one is the actual fulfillment of it. So this is where we're getting close to the end, by the way. Um, the shadow begins. We have, Constantine doing his thing and Christ doing it. Now, Constantine initiates the Davidic phase, the shadow of what Christ is going to do, and then Christ is actually going to do that. Theodosius declares it the official religion. Christ is the truth official. Justinian destroys it. He binds the dragon, which correlates to Christ casting it into the lake of fire forever. And so we have this Solomonic phase in history as a shadow, which correlates to the exact 1,000-year reign of Christ. But like any shadow, it has to end. Like we don't look at Solomon's rule and all the high taxes and all these other things that we don't look at that as part of Christ because it's not part of the shadow. But like this shadow, the symbol of eternity ends, and the dragon must be loosed. So once the symbol of eternity is finished, okay, the symbol's done. It can come back up. But that correlates, but after the 1,000-year reign of Christ, obviously God's all in all. Now this is this is my last thing here. I've got a thing that kind of shows you the timeline of the dragon. So we have Revelation 12. He's ousted from the political heavens. He's got a short time. He's persecuting the woman, and starts the Davidic phase. He gives his power to the beast. The dragon is bound for 1,000 years. That's the Solomonic phase in shadow and history. But he has to be loosed, and he comes out by, basically the Protestant Reformation. 1900s early, we see him still deceiving with the beast and false prophet now. And now we have the return of Christ, which marks the actual Davidic phase. And this is still future, obviously. And as it says, Christ himself is actually going to cast it in the lake of fire and destroy it forever, starting the real, full Solomonic phase. Now, this is, I'll kind of end with this. Why did the dragon have to be loose for a little season? Why must he? Well, if you think of it, Justinian couldn't destroy it because whose right is it? It's Christ. That's why it had to be loosed for a season. It had to be loosed so the true Christ can destroy it. So there's a lot of questions with that, I'm sure. I'll address those in part 3, but it's when things start clicking and the more you look and there's more that just adds to it, that seems to me to be I haven't found anything that disagrees with this, and this answers all my questions and more. But why is the angel in Revelation 19:20 different? We'll talk about that next time. But as far as the way of exhortation goes, we think of what is the spirit of our age? Is it not everything you can believe is right except for the truth of God? Like we'll tolerate everything except for that because you guys aren't tolerant. We see that nature. That's the dragon deceiving. It's a very stark warning to not fall into those ways of thinking. And if we start turning our attention to the memorials, Christ is going to destroy this forever. Once he returns and once the earth is filled with the knowledge of the Lord, he's never going to, that part is never going to go away. It's there forever. And what a blessing it is to be part of this group that will help him teach and instruct and conquer. And that's the blessing that's offered to us. So with that, it was a little long, sorry, but I'll stop recording here and